had happened at this point in history was there were hundreds of people who had seen Jesus and they were running around telling other people, right? So people were getting eyewitness accounts, including Thomas. So before Jesus had shown up in that room, like dozens of people, like, out of their mind with amazement, had been telling Thomas about how this guy had risen from the dead and you know him, he's your friend Jesus. And Thomas is sitting there like, well, man, like, I hear your story, but it's just hard for me to believe. Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So I brought that up because, like, this is really commonly used to justify blind faith, essentially. Like, would you agree?
Yes.
Yes. And I think that's maybe you could interpret it that way, I suppose, but I think a more accurate interpretation of what he was saying is essentially, like, you notice he's not calling Thomas an idiot. He's not saying, like, you wicked sinner or anything like that, right? He's not doing any of that. He just said, you saw me, so you believed. Neutral statement. Then he says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So, like, that second part, people kind of, I think they kind of make that a little more mystical than it should be, because what had happened at this point in history was there were hundreds of people who had seen Jesus and they were running around telling other people, right? So people were getting eyewitness accounts, including Thomas. So before Jesus had shown up in that room, like, dozens of people, like, out of their mind with amazement, had been telling Thomas about how this guy had risen from the dead and you know him, he's your friend Jesus. And Thomas is sitting there like, well, man, like, I hear your story, but it's just hard for me to believe, right? And I think what Jesus is saying, like, it's good if you can, let's say, take an eyewitness testimony. Like, you haven't seen it, right? But let's say someone gives you a few eyewitness testimonies of a certain fact, and you can say, okay, I can believe that. Like, in court, for example, if someone gives you some solid evidence to something, let's say it's something like pretty hard to believe, like, even, like, let's say something supernatural or something, to use that term. But there's really good evidence. Like, you can't really say the evidence is bad. Like, it's there's evidence. But you can say, well, I find it hard to believe, right? That's reasonable enough. So I think what I'm saying is, like, some people are like Thomas. They read the Gospels, they read these things, they haven't seen it themselves, they've never seen anything like that, they find it hard to believe. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I don't think that's unreasonable, and I don't think God condemns people, and I don't think it's a good thing to use this verse to justify, like, dogmatic blind faith. I think it's actually more the opposite meaning. It's just saying, like, if you're able to take evidence and believe things based on solid evidence, that's blessed, right? But if you're one of those people like Thomas, he's not saying it's bad. Like, that's probably pretty natural, normal thing. So, like, for me, I think the Luke, Matthew, Mark, and John as evidence are pretty good evidence of the facts. I think it's reasonable from those to conclude the basic facts that most people know, that Jesus existed. He lived in so and so place. He had certain miraculous acts that many people saw, and then he was crucified, and then many people saw him alive after that. Like, those basic, like, 4 facts are pretty, like, consistent. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. My next question to you is, staying on that topic, did Christ rise from the dead, and how important is it to the New Testament?
Like I believe he did. I think it's important. It's because really like the central message of Jesus was eternal life. It was this idea that your spirit and your being doesn't have to die because you physically die. So in order to show and prove to people that he wasn't just making stuff up, he actually came back from the dead, right? As an evidence for what he was preaching. So I think it's very important to the like his central message of eternal life, like the spirit being eternal, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because I've heard a lot of arguments. People say that that they don't know why it's necessary, because here was, this man. Either you believe he was the son of God or God or whatever, but here was this man. He did all these great things, and people sometimes don't understand why these miracles are important. Um, but you do believe that these stories of miracles are in fact important.
Yeah, I would say they're important.
Hmm.
Like how important, that's another question. But I would say they're certainly like there's certainly eye-catching details in the whole story. Like they were put in those gospels, and highlighted for a reason.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting that you brought up Thomas. Um, some people would say that Thomas is like the 13th apostle, or am I confusing it with something, man? I gotta refresh my memory.
Uh, I don't know. I'm not
Yeah,
even able to like list you the apostles or anything like that. I would have to go look it up. It's not
yeah.
something I have
So
memorized.
but to you, basically, the resurrection is a historical fact, because you are saying that you have seen enough evidence in the text to say that yes, this actually happened.
Yeah, I think like for instance, historically, it builds a reasonable case for me. And similarly to how if I were to like try to establish the facts surrounding, you know, uh, some other historical event in ancient history, a similar process, I would look at different chronicles and I would see if there's a fairly consistent story, and the sources are fairly like there's good manuscripts and there's not a lot of differences in translation. And if that's the case, I would say, well, it appears to be pretty good, and the burden of proof is no longer on me. Like if the evidence is pretty sound and someone wants to say it's not, it's on them. The onus is on them to say, well, I don't think this is good. Well, you have to now show how this evidence isn't good, because I see it's fairly consistent in my
Okay.
my opinion. I don't Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Now that you have been in Poland this whole time, have you picked up the Bible in Polish at all?
I had it before. Yeah, I had it before.
Do you find any discrepancies between, like, let's say, the King James version and what you seen in Polish text?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, there's always like many minor discrepancies, and then
Mhm.
there's always a few bigger ones. And but the main, let's say those main facts that very like even among, let's say, all the various religious denominations and Christian denominations and all that, not a lot of argument about the main facts. Like, okay, Jesus living in Nazareth, the Palestine, miracles, crucifixion, resurrection. Like,
What I wanted to ask you, to you, because this is a big argument, and I believe me and you talked about this back in the day, but I just want to refresh this a little bit. Um, to you, Christ was, and I just want to say, To me, I differentiate between Jesus and Christ. That's to me personally. To me, Jesus is more of speaking of the flesh, and Christ is to me is more of the anointed one. But to ask you, was Christ God, the incarnation of God, the Son of God, or a prophet, or also like how do you see it?
Um, okay. There's a book I wanted to reference about this. I forget now. Um, but like just in a nutshell, my view on it, um, I don't. I think the idea of Jesus being God is connected to the Nicene era, and I think before that, like that idea is almost part of the Nicene Credo, and I think before that, it wasn't. And certainly a lot of the conflict in the original, the original beginnings of Catholicism at the era of Constantine was surrounding that very issue of, is Jesus God? And a lot
Yeah.
of apostolic believers were persecuted and oppressed because they wouldn't say that Jesus is God. They would not repeat that credo because they didn't believe it. And I would probably be one of those people. I would not stand there and repeat that credo. I'm not saying like clearly yes or no. I'm just saying I wouldn't say I believe that, and I would lean more towards no, like that he's the son, you could say. And
Okay.
that's speaking, like that's a bit metaphysical in a way, because like Jesus was a man, but then how can he be the son of God if he was a man, and was there a virgin birth and this sort of thing, right?
Because yeah, because in like religious uh scholarship and all, like this question always comes up. So my next question is, how important is to figure that out, if Christ was incarnation of God, the Son of God, or just a prophet?
I don't know how important it is. I really don't know. Like on an intellectual level, how many people are going to have the time to even really look into that? And is it that important? I mean, I don't know. It's something that like nerdy people mostly with time have, look into, I think. Like the average person who believes in God or Jesus, it's the spiritual relationship and connection and what they do in their life that's important, and their trust in that higher source, and like that, because God is love to me anyway. That's God is love. When you feel love, actual real love, that is God in all the different ways. That's God, and he's multidimensional. So like I don't want to put I'm just saying that because I don't want to put too much stress on like academia
Right.
and cerebral sort of things. It's I would say it's important, but like people killed each other over this. you know,
Hmm. Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
that important.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad. I'm actually glad that you that you said this. So shifting a little bit into the revelations, because the last time that we really talked for, a good period of time, which was a few years ago, you brought up a lot of different quotes and stuff from, like, in text from the revelations. How firm are you on the revelations nowadays?
I'd like to think I was never very firm, although I'm not sure how true that is. It's hard to say. It's probably too opinionated about some things, but for the most part, I like my view on a lot of prophetic symbolism in Revelations has not changed much, because I think it's pretty reasonable when you compare different prophetic texts. then you get a clearer picture of what Revelations is actually saying, because it, John, sorry, one moment. John,
did you just kick her out, man?
yeah, I did. Actually, she wanted to go outside, so
Mhm.
that's the thing. Is I don't like letting the cat out at this time, because
Yeah,
it's not what we do, and she should know better. But like,
you
yeah,
wanted to go outside.
she won't
So
stop.
so you were saying, John?
So like, as a prophet, you know, he was drawing from the prophets before him. He read Daniel, he read Isaiah, he read Enoch. If you read Daniel, Isaiah, Enoch, and so forth, if you can read all those prophecies that they said without trying to interpret it too much, you see very consistent themes and symbology across all of them. And if you understand the worldview that they had as Hebrews, raised in a Hebrew culture, looking at things from that perspective, you can sort of discount a lot of modern interpretations, I would say fairly reasonably.
Mm,
Because some people read Revelations from an American viewpoint, a Baptist viewpoint, and they just kind of wing it, in my opinion. They just sort of be like, "Oh, means this and that means that." And there's always a bit of that with prophecy. It's not that, it can't be that academic, I think,
mm.
as some other things. But at least if you reference the previous prophets, you can see the kind of things that Revelations is trying to say in some cases. So like, um, I'm kind of rambling now. What?
No, no,
Sorry.
no.
What?
I see what you're saying, but this leads me to my next question. Do you still believe that we are living through the revelations now?